In the spring of 2018, when the wheat fields of western Kansas were beginning to turn green beneath a pale and uncertain sky, Samuel Reed drove a rented excavator into the middle of his farm and began digging holes. They were not irrigation reservoirs, at least not the kind his neighbors recognized. They were not deep enough for fishing, large enough for cattle, or straight enough to be useful in any conventional sense. Most were shallow, uneven basins no wider than a small farmhouse kitchen, scattered across the slopes and low places of his 360-acre property. By the end of the first week, Samuel had dug 23 of them. By the end of the month, there were 78. By midsummer, more than 200 small ponds interrupted the clean geometry of his fields like fingerprints pressed into wet clay. People in Mason County noticed. Farmers always noticed when another farmer did something they could not immediately explain. At the grain elevator, men leaned against pickup trucks and traded theories. Some said Samuel had finally lost his judgment after 3 poor harvests. Others believed he was chasing a government conservation payment. A few insisted he was trying to create a duck hunting business, although no ducks had been seen on his land in years. Dale Mercer, whose family owned the property immediately north of Samuel's, called the basins Reed's Mosquito Resorts. The name spread quickly. Within weeks, even the teenage cashier at the feed store asked Samuel whether he planned to charge admission. Samuel smiled, paid for his fencing staples, and drove home without explaining himself. He was 49 years old, broad through the shoulders, slow in conversation, and weathered in the particular way of men who had spent most of their lives looking into sunlight. He had inherited the farm from his father, who had inherited part of it from his own father. But Samuel did not speak of legacy with sentimentality. To him, land was not a family monument. It was a living system of soil, water, roots, insects, wind, temperature, and time. It could be generous, but only when treated with attention. It could also remember every careless decision made upon it. Samuel had learned this slowly, and mostly through failure. For nearly 20 years, he had farmed the way everyone around him farmed. He planted winter wheat in long, straight rows, followed it with sorghum or corn, applied fertilizer according to the cooperative's recommendations, and worked the ground whenever weeds or compaction appeared. During good years, the farm paid its debts and left enough for repairs. During bad years, Samuel borrowed against the next season. Like most farmers in the county, he measured success in bushels per acre and rainfall in inches. He had never thought much about what happened to the rain after it struck the soil. Then came the storm of May 2016. It delivered nearly 5 inches of water in less than 3 hours. Samuel stood beneath the roof of his machine shed and watched brown water rush across his fields, carrying topsoil, young plants, fertilizer, and pieces of corn stalk into the county ditch. The rain everyone had prayed for arrived all at once, and most of it left before midnight. 2 weeks later, the surface was dry again. By August, the corn had curled into gray-green tubes beneath temperatures above 100 degrees. Samuel harvested less than half of what he had expected. The following year brought a different kind of loss. Rainfall came in brief showers, never enough to penetrate deeply. The wheat emerged unevenly. Wind tore across the exposed ridges and lifted soil into the air. Samuel watched a dark veil move eastward from his southern field and felt something in him shift. He began to understand that his farm did not suffer only because there was too little rain. It suffered because it had lost the ability to keep the rain it received. That winter, while other farmers attended equipment auctions or planned seed purchases, Samuel began reading. He studied contour farming, water infiltration, prairie restoration, check dams, shallow swales, and small-scale rainwater harvesting. He requested old soil surveys from the county office and found maps showing seasonal streams that had disappeared decades before he was born. He spoke with a retired conservation technician named Walter Hayes, who had spent 37 years working throughout the High Plains. Walter was 74, sharp-eyed, and unimpressed by large machinery. When Samuel showed him the maps, Walter traced one thick finger across the faded blue lines and said, "Your farm was built to slow water before we taught it to shed water." Samuel did not understand at first. Walter explained that the land's original grasses, root systems, depressions, and meandering drainage paths had once held rainfall in place. Over time, fields had been leveled, channels straightened, low spots filled, and soil repeatedly worked until water could move across it almost without resistance. "You're not dry because the sky forgot you," Walter said. "You're dry because every drop knows how to leave." The words stayed with Samuel. Over the next 3 months, he walked the farm after every rain, no matter how small. He carried wooden stakes, marking places where water gathered and places where it accelerated. He studied the slopes at dawn when shadows made the subtle contours visible. He dug test holes and examined the soil beneath the surface crust. On the western ridge, the ground was compacted nearly as hard as brick 8 inches down. In the lower pasture, however, he found dark soil beneath a stand of switchgrass that had escaped the plow. Moisture remained there days after the surrounding fields had dried. Samuel began making a plan. He did not intend to dig one large reservoir because one reservoir depended on water reaching one place. Instead, he wanted to interrupt runoff everywhere. The ponds would be shallow enough to spread water rather than concentrate it, positioned along natural contours so that each basin caught what the basin above could not hold. Some would remain dry most of the year. Some would support grasses, frogs, insects, or birds. Their purpose was not to store water visibly forever. Their purpose was to give water time to enter the soil. When Samuel explained this to his wife, Ellen, she listened without interrupting. She had managed the farm accounts for 22 years and understood exactly how little money they could risk. The excavator rental, fuel, surveying equipment, fencing, seed, and lost planting area would cost more than Samuel first admitted. "How much land are you taking out of production?" she asked. "Maybe 20 acres altogether," he said. Ellen looked at him across the kitchen table. 20 acres we already struggle to make pay." Samuel nodded. "They aren't paying now. They're just carrying water away from the acres that might." Ellen did not agree immediately. She rarely did. She asked for the maps, the costs, and the expected timeline. Samuel showed her everything. Finally, she placed her hand on the stack of notes and said, "We can survive being wrong once. We cannot survive being stubborn about being wrong." Samuel understood the condition. He would measure everything. If the system failed, he would stop. In April, he rented the excavator. Dale Mercer drove over before noon on the first day and parked beside the field entrance. He watched Samuel shape a shallow crescent across the hillside and finally called out, "You planning to grow rice?" Samuel shut down the machine. "Trying to keep the rain here." Dale looked toward the empty sky. "Might try ordering some first." He laughed at his own joke, lifted one hand, and drove away. Samuel returned to digging. He did not know whether the plan would work. He only knew that continuing as before had already failed. The first ponds looked ugly. Samuel had imagined soft earthen basins following the natural curves of the landscape. What he created instead were rough scars of overturned clay, irregular mounds, and raw edges that dried hard beneath the sun. Ellen stood beside the first completed series and said they resembled bomb craters. Samuel agreed. He spent evenings smoothing the banks, spreading native grass seed, and placing stones where incoming water might cause erosion. He installed simple overflow channels so that once one pond filled, excess water moved gently toward the next. Walter Hayes visited twice a month, walking the contours with a cane and correcting Samuel whenever the slope was too steep or a basin too deep. "You're not building bathtubs," Walter reminded him. "You're teaching water to hesitate." The summer brought only scattered storms. Most of the ponds remained empty, which made Samuel's work appear even more foolish. Dry basins collected tumbleweeds, dust, and occasional scraps of windblown trash. Children riding the school bus began counting them. Someone painted a wooden sign and placed it near Samuel's road during the night. "Reed Lake District," it read, with an arrow pointing toward the driest field. Ellen found Samuel pulling the sign from the ground before sunrise. "You going to burn it?" she asked. Samuel studied the lettering. "No, good lumber." He carried it to the shed and later used the boards to repair a chicken coop. The mockery did not anger him as much as people assumed. What troubled him was uncertainty. He had taken productive land out of rotation, spent nearly $18,000, and built a system that had not yet received enough rain to test itself. Each evening, he checked the weather forecast. Each morning, the probability of rain seemed to move farther into the future. By August, the sorghum was struggling. Dale Mercer stopped at the fence one afternoon and looked across the dry basins. "How much water are you holding now?" he asked. "None," Samuel said. Dale smiled. "At least the mosquitoes are disappointed." Samuel almost smiled with him. Then he pointed toward the native grass planted around the nearest basin. "Soil under that grass is 6 degrees cooler than the row beside it." Dale shrugged. "Can't sell cool dirt." He drove away. Samuel wrote the temperature difference in his notebook. In September, a storm finally arrived from the northwest. It was not a dramatic storm, only a steady rain that lasted 7 hours and dropped just over 2 inches. Samuel put on his coat and walked into it. Water began running along the compacted rows, gathering speed as it moved downhill. At the first pond, the flow spread across the wide, shallow basin. Brown sediment settled. The pond filled to a depth of 14 inches and began releasing water through the grassed overflow toward the next basin. Samuel followed it. The second filled more slowly. The third received clear water rather than mud. Across the farm, the network woke piece by piece. Some ponds filled halfway, others barely collected enough to darken the soil. A few overflowed exactly as planned. 2 failed completely when their banks collapsed. Samuel worked until after midnight, reinforcing the damaged edges with stones and straw. Ellen brought him coffee and stood beside him beneath the rain. They watched water remain where, in previous years, it would have reached the county ditch within an hour. By morning, almost every basin held something. Some appeared as shallow silver mirrors beneath the clearing sky. Others had already emptied into the ground. Samuel pushed a moisture probe beside one of the dry basins and found wet soil nearly 3 feet down. In the adjoining field, moisture reached less than 14 inches. That measurement changed the way he saw the system. The ponds were not failures when they emptied. Emptying was their work. Over the following weeks, Samuel compared crop growth around the basins with growth farther away. Sorghum within 30 yards of several ponds remained green longer and produced heavier seed heads. The difference was not enough to transform the year, but it was enough to justify continuing. He showed the records to Ellen. She examined the figures and nodded. "Not proven," she said, "but not foolish." That winter, Samuel dug another 86 basins and reshaped 30 that had performed poorly. He planted deep-rooted native grasses around their edges, including big bluestem, western wheatgrass, buffalo grass, and switchgrass. He added narrow strips of clover and alfalfa where the soil allowed it. Instead of plowing entire fields, he began disturbing only the planting rows. Crop residue remained on the surface to slow evaporation and shield the ground from wind. The farm looked less tidy than it once had. This bothered some neighbors almost as much as the ponds. Clean fields were a point of pride in Mason County. Samuel's land appeared uneven, grassy, and unfinished. Yet by the second summer, small changes became visible. Meadowlarks nested near the pond edges. Dragonflies appeared after storms. Frogs colonized 3 basins that held water for more than a month. Rabbits returned to the grass strips, followed by hawks. More importantly, the soil began changing. The hard surface crust softened in protected areas. Earthworms appeared in test holes where Samuel had not seen them in years. Rainfall infiltrated faster. During a 3-inch storm in June 2019, water leaving Samuel's southern boundary ran nearly clear. While the ditch below Dale Mercer's field turned dark with soil, Samuel did not mention this to Dale, but Dale noticed. In early July, the County Conservation Board asked Samuel to give a short presentation about the project. 12 people attended. 4 were board members, 3 were relatives. Dale sat in the back with his arms crossed. Samuel explained his measurements without exaggeration. The ponds had reduced runoff. They had improved soil moisture near their edges. They had also cost money, required maintenance. taken land out of production, and attracted weeds that Samuel had not anticipated. I'm not saying this works everywhere, he concluded. I'm saying our fields receive water we never count because we lose it before we can use it. During questions, a farmer named Lloyd Barrett raised his hand. How many bushels did the frogs produce? Several people laughed. Samuel waited. None, he said. But the sorghum beside them produced 19 more bushels per acre. The room became quieter. Afterward, nobody asked for his plans. Dale approached him in the parking lot. 19 more, he asked. In the best sections? Samuel replied. Average was 7. Dale nodded as though correcting for Samuel's honesty. 7 won't pay for an excavator. Not in 1 year. Maybe not in 10. Maybe. Samuel opened his truck door. Dale studied him. You really don't know. Do you? No, Samuel said. That's why I measure. The answer irritated Dale more than certainty would have. Samuel's project continued through 2020 and 2021. Some ponds disappeared beneath grasses and looked like ordinary depressions. Others deepened naturally as water moved soil toward their centers. Samuel connected selected basins with shallow swales and planted cottonwood and willow only in the lowest places where their roots would not compete with crops. He placed floating escape ramps in the longer-lasting ponds so small animals would not drown. Ellen created a separate account to track the system's expenses and income effects. Their son, Nathan, returned from agricultural college during summers and helped install moisture sensors. Unlike Samuel, Nathan enjoyed explaining the project and began documenting it with aerial photographs. From above, the farm no longer resembled a rigid checkerboard. It appeared as a network of curves, grass bands, fields, and dark points of water arranged according to slope rather than property lines. Some people admired it. Others considered it proof that Samuel had abandoned serious farming. Then the rain began to disappear. The winter of 2021 produced almost no snow. March arrived with dry winds that stripped moisture from the surface before seeds had fully germinated. April brought 2 brief showers totaling less than half an inch. By May, the United States Drought Monitor placed most of western Kansas in severe drought. By June, the classification changed to extreme. Wells began dropping. Pastures turned brown 6 weeks earlier than usual. Ranchers sold calves they had planned to keep. Corn leaves curled before noon and remained curled after sunset. The air smelled of dust, hot metal, and stressed vegetation. Local radio stations read daily fire warnings. County officials prohibited open burning. At the grain elevator, conversations became shorter. Men who had once joked about Samuel's ponds now discussed crop insurance, loan extensions, and which cattle buyers were still offering fair prices. Samuel's farm was not untouched. His wheat yield fell sharply. Several upper ponds dried by early June. 2 wells produced less water than the year before. The native grasses browned along exposed ridges, and Samuel lost nearly 30 acres of sorghum where the soil remained too shallow. But the deeper-rooted strips around the pond network stayed green. Basins in the lower fields still held water beneath mats of vegetation. Soil moisture sensors showed reserves at depths of 3 to 6 feet, where crop roots could reach them. Fields immediately below the pond chains remained cooler and retained moisture weeks longer than neighboring ground. Samuel reduced planting density, rotated livestock through the surviving grass strips, and avoided pumping except where necessary. His crops did not flourish. They endured. By late July, endurance had become remarkable. Dale Mercer's largest stock pond dried to cracked mud. His cattle crowded around 2 metal tanks filled from a declining well. The pump ran nearly continuously, and one afternoon it failed. Dale found Samuel repairing fence near the northern boundary. The older confidence was gone from his voice. I need water for 86 head, he said. Samuel set down his pliers. How long until I get the pump rebuilt? 2 days, maybe 3. Samuel looked toward the lower pond on his side of the fence. It still held nearly 4 feet of water, fed not by a spring, but by the accumulated infiltration and slow release of storms from previous seasons. Cut the fence at the west corner, Samuel said. Bring them through in groups. Ground is soft near the north bank. Dale stared at him. I can pay. We'll count it later. After everything I said, Samuel picked up the pliers again. Cattle didn't say it. Dale moved the herd that evening. The animals entered Samuel's field beneath a red sunset, thin dust rising around their legs. They drank from a pond that Dale had ridiculed when it was empty. Samuel stood back to prevent crowding. Dale removed his hat and watched in silence. On the third day, his pump was repaired. Before leaving, he placed an envelope on the seat of Samuel's truck. Samuel returned it unopened. "Help me repair the south spillway this fall," he said. "We'll be square." Dale nodded. The drought continued. In August, the municipal wells serving the small town of Bellwether began producing water with high sediment levels. Residents were asked to limit outdoor use. The volunteer fire department worried that its storage tanks could not be refilled quickly during a major grass fire. Samuel met with the fire chief and offered access to 3 of his largest ponds. Nathan mapped routes strong enough to support heavy trucks. They installed temporary intake pipes and cleared vegetation around the loading areas. 2 weeks later, lightning struck a dry pasture 7 miles west of town. Wind pushed the fire east at nearly 20 miles per hour. Flames moved through brittle grass, crossed one county road, and threatened 6 homes and a grain storage facility. Fire crews drew more than 40,000 gallons from Samuel's ponds over 9 hours. The water did not extinguish the drought, save every field, or restore the lost harvest. But it gave firefighters enough time to hold the eastern line until the wind weakened after midnight. No homes were lost. The grain facility survived. The following morning, photographs circulated across the county. One showed a tanker filling beside a pond ringed with green switchgrass, while smoke darkened the horizon. Another showed Samuel standing waist-deep near an intake pipe, clearing debris so the pump would continue working. The same radio host who had once referred to the basins as Samuel's Puddle Empire now described the farm as a vital emergency water source. Samuel disliked the sudden praise almost as much as he had disliked the jokes. The ponds had not been built for recognition. They had been built because water needed time. That was all. Yet people began arriving. First came Dale Mercer with a shovel and a load of stone for the damaged spillway. Then Lloyd Barrett, the farmer who had made the joke about frog yields, asked whether Samuel would walk his western pasture. 3 ranchers from the next county requested copies of Nathan's maps. The Conservation Board organized a field day, and more than 200 people attended. Samuel stood beside the first basin he had ever dug. It was almost hidden now beneath tall grass. He explained that the farm had not created water. It had simply stopped treating every rainfall as something to remove. "A pond doesn't have to stay full to be useful," he told the group. "Sometimes the best water is the water you can no longer see because it entered the ground." A woman asked whether he had known a drought was coming. Samuel shook his head. "No one knows exactly what year the hard season will arrive. Then why spend so much preparing for it?" another person asked. Samuel looked across the gathering. Many of the faces belonged to people who had laughed at him. He felt no satisfaction in their losses. Drought had humbled the whole county, including him. "Because the work still helps in a wet year," he said. "And because when the dry year comes, it's too late to begin storing yesterday's rain." The words appeared in newspapers across the state. Grants followed. The county launched a voluntary watershed program to help farmers build small retention basins, restore grassed waterways, and reduce runoff. Samuel refused offers to patent the layout or sell a branded system. Every farm was different. He insisted the contours had to be observed, measured, and respected. Dale converted 14 acres along his southern slope into a chain of shallow ponds and native grass. Lloyd Barrett built 6 basins in his cattle pasture. Within 3 years, more than 40 farms in the watershed had adopted some version of the approach. The results were not miraculous. Some basins failed, some filled with sediment, some were placed badly and had to be rebuilt. Farmers argued about costs, weeds, lost acreage, and maintenance. But after heavy storms, the county ditch ran more slowly and carried less soil. Wells in participating areas stabilized earlier after dry seasons. Native birds returned to places where there had been only bare field edges. The landscape began relearning how to hesitate. Samuel's own farm recovered gradually. The drought broke in the spring of 2023 with a series of steady rains. This time, instead of watching water rush away, Samuel stood on the ridge with Ellen and watched each pond receive its share. The upper basins filled, overflowed gently, and passed water downward. Grass bent beneath the rain, but held the soil. The deepest pond reached its spillway for the first time in 18 months. Frogs began calling before dark. Ellen opened an umbrella. Although the wind immediately turned it inside out, Samuel laughed, took it from her, and closed it. They stood in the rain without speaking. At the lowest edge of the property, water entered the final basin, clear enough for them to see submerged grass moving beneath the surface. Years earlier, Samuel would have measured that storm by the number written in his rain gauge. Now he understood that rainfall was not only what fell from the sky, it was what the soil accepted, what roots protected, what basins slowed, and what remained available after the clouds were gone. Dale joined them later that afternoon. He had aged visibly during the drought. His face was thinner, and he no longer approached Samuel with jokes prepared. He looked across the connected ponds and green strips. "I thought you were wasting good ground," he said. Samuel watched water slipping quietly through a stone-lined overflow. Some of it was never good ground for crops. You knew that eventually. Dale removed his cap and rubbed the worn brim between his fingers. "How did you know the ponds would save anything?" Samuel considered the question. "I didn't." Dale looked at him, waiting for more. Samuel nodded toward the field. "I only knew the rain was leaving faster than the land could use it. Everyone kept blaming the sky. I thought maybe we should look at what we were doing after the rain arrived." The answer was simple, but it carried years of observation, ridicule, uncertainty, labor, and patience. Samuel had not defeated the drought. No farmer defeats weather. He had changed his relationship with what the weather provided. The hundreds of ponds were not monuments to his intelligence. They were evidence that he had been willing to admit the old system was failing and patient enough to build something whose value could not be measured immediately. In time, the people of Mason County stopped calling them mosquito resorts. They called them catchments, infiltration basins, wildlife ponds, emergency reserves, or simply Samuel's ponds. Children who once counted the empty holes from the school bus grew old enough to help their parents dig new ones. Walter Hayes died in the winter of 2024, but Samuel kept the first contour map they had marked together. Above Samuel's desk hung a small note in Walter's handwriting. "Water does not need to be forced. It needs to be given a reason to stay." Samuel read it whenever a bank statement, weather forecast, or a failed crop made him question the years of work. By then, he understood that the note referred to more than water. People were not transformed by being shamed for what they had failed to see. They changed when someone showed them another way and left the gate open when they finally came asking for help. Samuel could have turned Dale's cattle away. He could have reminded the town of every joke, every sign, and every dismissive conversation. Instead, he shared what the land had stored. That choice changed the county more deeply than the ponds themselves. The drought revealed the value of the water, but generosity revealed the value of the man who had kept it. Samuel began digging because he wanted his own farm to survive. He continued because he learned that water never respects the lines drawn on property maps. It moves beneath fences, through soil, around roots, and across generations. A decision made on one hillside can shape the life of a family miles downstream. A basin dug by one farmer can become water for another farmer's cattle, protection for a stranger's home, or the beginning of a different future for an entire community. Everyone had mocked Samuel Reed for digging hundreds of small ponds. Then the drought came, and the county finally understood that he had not been wasting his land. He had been making room for the future. If Samuel's story reminds you that patience, preparation, and generosity can change more than one life, please subscribe and like the video. Here we tell the forgotten stories of ordinary people who listened carefully, acted quietly, and left the land and the people around them stronger than they found them. The next lesson may already be waiting beneath the surface.